So thank you all for taking the time to be here with us, and welcome to this. This is the second edition of the Hugo J. Mueller Linguistics Lecture Series. This was launched, the series were launched last year in conjunction with the new linguistics program. My name is Nuria Villanova. I'm the Associate Dean of Undergraduate Studies in the College of Arts and Sciences, and I'm here tonight to, something which is even more important than this. I'm a faculty member of World Languages and Cultures as well. So this is my department as well. So I'm here tonight to, to talk to you and to make these remarks on behalf of our dean, Linda Dury, who unfortunately couldn't be here. And she does send her regards, though. I want to congratulate and thank the organizers of this beautiful event, the Department of World Languages and Cultures, its chair, Brenda Worth, the organizer of the series and the coordinator of the linguistics minor, Amelia Zeng, my dear colleagues, staff and students in WLC, and our distinguished guest, Dr. Kirby Conrad. The new linguistics program has already received lots of energy and enthusiasm. Both the linguistics minor and this series align perfectly with the vision of the College of Arts and Sciences and American University goals. It also shares the spirit of our new president, Jonathan Alger Civic Life Initiative to advance knowledge, promote critical scholarship, foster intellectual curiosity, and encourage dialogue across difference in an inclusive, diverse environment in which every member of our community feels welcome. Now, I would like to introduce the chair of the Department of World Languages and Cultures and dear colleague and friend, Dr. Brenda Worth.
Thank you. Thank you, Associate Dean Villanova, for that introduction and your lovely remarks. I wanted to take a moment to talk a little bit about the history of the Linguistics Lecture Series at AU. It was initiated in the 1970s by Dr. Hugo Mueller, who was also a founder and the first chair of the department formerly known as Language and Foreign Studies. So we're so happy to bring back this proud American university tradition now in its second year, along with the launch of AU's new linguistics program. We've seen a lot of student interest in linguistics grow over the years, and through this new minor, students now have a way to channel this interest into new research endeavors with tangible outcomes. The minor is getting great reception, and there's an enthusiastic cohort of students that's bringing a lot of energy to the program through a very active linguistics club and events such as the recent excursion to Planet Word Museum. Understanding language is key to understanding society and humanity, and the study of linguistics is more critical than ever to resolve pressing social issues in the globalized world. By engaging a sociocultural lens, we aim to understand how language can help address these critical challenges. This aim aligns both with WLC's focus on multilingualism and multiculturalism, as well as with President Alger's Civic Life Initiative. We're excited about the cross-disciplinary energy this event has generated thanks to co-sponsorship by the Center for Diversity and Inclusion, the Departments of Anthropology, Literature, and Sociology, the School of Education, and programs in Women's, Gender, and Sexuality Studies, and the Writing Program. And now I would like to turn it over to Dr. Amelia Zeng, Director of the Linguistics Program, who has the distinct honor of introducing our highly anticipated speaker, Dr. Kirby Conrod.
Oh, thank you. I'm going to read off my laptop, but because I'm high tech like that. It is my very great pleasure to introduce our esteemed speaker tonight, the wonderful Dr. Kirby Conrod, assistant professor at Swarthmore College, a rising superstar in linguistics and sociolinguistics, especially the new and very important area of transgender linguistics, which is something that has not gotten nearly enough attention until recently. Their work has been published in a number of wonderful outlets, not least the Oxford Handbook of Language and Sexuality and the Canadian Journal of Linguistics, amongst others. Not only this, but they are also a public intellectual with podcasts, blogger, social media, etc. So spreading the word outside of the ivory tower. Their interests lie in sociosyntax, combining minimalist syntax with sociolinguistics and pragmatics with a particular focus on pronouns, pronoun diversity, how pronouns change across time, and how, of course, they relate to social identity, which brings us to tonight's talk, Pronoun Euphoria. Love the title. Dr. Conrad argues that pronouns are not socially neutral replacements for nouns, but actually they encode social relationships, sometimes explicitly, as in languages such as Thai, and sometimes implicitly, as in gendered pronouns in English, and that changes in our pronominal system are mediated by changes in how social relationships are conceived of and organized. They also conduct research on transgender issues, cisgender essentialist methodologies, and bias in linguistics research, a really important topic. So without further ado, thank you for joining us. We're so happy to have you here, and we're really looking forward to your talk. Dr. Conrad.
Thank you. I'm going to put this in the thingy. How's this? Okay. Thank you so much for saying nice things about me. And oh my God, you guys have so many departments. Like, doing this. So I'm just like really, really grateful to be here. Very, very feeling complimented and also feeling kind of energized of like, let's say words about how linguistics is important in the world and how it's good to study it. I'm like, I like that. Let's do more of that. So I want to sort of forefront that this is collaborative research. I collaborate with a lot of people. The co-authors that I've listed on here are not all the co-authors that have worked on this. They are sort of one cohort of my undergraduate research assistants at Swarthmore College, who all are amazing and a real sort of demonstration of how much student research can push the field of study forward. So my acknowledgements are actually at the beginning for this reason. So I first want to shout out my research consortium, SEPTA, which is a cool joke because that's the acronym for the regional public transit in Philadelphia, but it also stands for Scientific Explorations of Pronouns and Trans Acceptance, which is a 5-lab group in the Philly area of linguists who are studying pronouns and trans stuff. It's just really cool. And I've been really grateful to my colleagues who are members of SEPTA for the mutual support, collaboration, and sort of ideas and brainstorming that have led to a lot of the projects coming out of all of our respective labs. My past and present Swarthmore undergrad research collaborators, and I really want to emphasize that they are my collaborators, and I have co-authored with all of these students in that, like, they write papers, like they really write a lot of paper. I write a little bit of paper, and I cheerlead a lot, but a lot of this research has been student driven. So Jasper, Kira, Elle, Max, Vic, Amelia, and Jenny are all amazing linguists. I'm so excited to see what they do next. Keep these names in mind. And then I want to thank a lot of linguists and linguist adjacent folks who support my research, and also all my friends at Swarthmore and my cats. It's important to put that stuff up front. So I want to give you sort of a tip about like what the reference is in my title. The idea is that there's this concept called gender euphoria, which is straightforwardly, it's the opposite of gender dysphoria. This is a sense of rightness or belonging, pleasure, joy, happiness related to how your gender presentation is perceived by others and by yourself. A lot of people that I talk to who can report on this experience, this affective internal experience of gender euphoria, will report that it's a kind of like giddy excitement. It's something that I, as a trans and non-binary person, really strive for. It is my driving force more than dysphoria. I am very interested in pursuing euphoria. And then neopronouns are they're kind of what they sound like. These are neologistic pronouns. The problem is that they are not as new as they sound. So they're often coined or formed by morphophonological analogy with existing pronouns. And in English, all the neopronouns that I'm going to be talking about are third-person singular pronouns that are developed specifically for the purpose of adding gender-neutral or expressively gendered options to the existing set of he, she, and they. So I want to start with some big ideas here. Neopronouns are a form that gets talked about a lot, but they are very, very, very low frequency. It's really hard to find any in corpus data. It's really hard to get any in just direct observation. Even when you're hanging out with mostly trans and non-binary people, you just don't hear neopronouns that frequently. But about half of people actually find them pretty accessible. And I'll talk about what it means to find a neopronoun accessible. But there's also going to be a lot in this talk that's about metalinguistic commentary where people talk about neopronouns, and the commentary about neopronouns looks a little bit different when it's coming from people who are using them as their own personal pronouns versus people who don't use them as their own personal pronouns. Neopronoun users tell us that it's important for their sense of identity, expression, and a feeling of rightness. People who don't use neopronouns, when they're talking about neopronouns, they're frequently talking about optimizing non-binary language. They're talking about efficiency and solving the problem of non-binary language, which is a different goal. And as linguists, I want to argue that we should pay attention to joy and euphoria, and that it really matters for how we study language. And one of the reasons for this, besides that it just feels good and is cool, is that playfulness is a huge driver of language change. A ton of language change comes from play and games and just sort of doing stuff because it's fun. So we should be paying attention. So I am going to report on sort of 3 phases of my study. There is a pilot survey and a follow-up survey, both of which were large online surveys that are asking people to give acceptability judgments. And then I'm going to sort of report on work in progress from my interview study. This is ongoing because it takes a long time to do interviews. I don't know if you've heard this, but it's slow. So I will be reporting a little bit of fun preview from my work in progress on those interviews. But a little bit of background first. So one of the things about neopronouns is that linguists just like haven't paid that much attention to them. So the previous work on neopronouns, even in a very, very well-studied language like English, a lot of mainstream linguistics work will sort of refer to neopronouns in a footnote and then be like, but nobody really uses them. And there's only a small handful of linguistic studies that have actually seriously studied them. So I want to shout out, and these are all fairly recent, you'll notice, and they're sort of in reverse chronological order. Dennis Barron's book is a really good historical account that goes through all the attempts to coin neopronouns that have happened in English. But he reports that none of them have really become mainstream. And he sort of concludes that singular they is becoming mainstream. And he talks about that contrast. The book is a really, really good, this is Dennis Barron's What's Your Pronoun? It's a really, really good accounting of like all of the attempts. Very, very thorough. There's like 100 pages of just citations at the end. It's incredible. But no sort of report on like usage necessarily. It's more of a lexicographical effort. Laura Hakanoho's dissertation and then subsequent publications have looked at sociolinguistic variation in acceptability ratings of neopronouns and also non-binary uses of a singular they pronoun. And what she found was that younger and queerer people are rating neopronouns higher, that is more acceptable, but not as high as they, which is sort of a preview of something that we'll see in a minute too. And then I want to also quickly cite M. Milterson's work from 2016, which was focused on noun self-pronouns. Noun self-pronouns are when you use a noun as a pronoun. Just any, we'll see some examples of this because one of my interview participants uses a great one. But any noun can just be a pronoun if you believe hard in yourself and like try and use the power of friendship. So like, you know, you can do like chair and then chair self. And that would be if your gender is chair, which is like, that's interesting. I want to talk to you later if that's true. But what Milterson found in their study of noun self pronouns, focusing mainly on people who were recruited from tumblr.com, which is a social media website, was that they were very, very tied to personal identity, that it was very idiosyncratic and very individual. And then the other thing, this is not exactly linguistics research, but one of the things of like trying to keep track of how many people are using neopronouns as their pronouns of reference. We keep an eye on the gender census, which is a yearly survey that looks at anybody who considers themselves outside of the gender binary. So it's a big sort of umbrella survey. It focuses primarily on people in the United States, and it's run by a non-academic. And so it's not something that's getting published in peer-reviewed journals, but it's something that I keep an eye on because it's an interesting sort of update on like, what are people doing? And it suggests that neopronouns do make up a notable minority of trans and gender expansive people in the English-speaking groups that are taking this survey. And that's something. It's worth thinking about. So my pilot survey is just looking at what do people think about neopronouns. So the pilot survey is an acceptability judgment survey looking at do people find these acceptable, or are they finding it really like surprising and sort of ungrammatical. We will be looking at 4 neopronouns, z with an X, and a and fe. These are coined by users of the neopronouns, and they are less widely used than canonical pronouns. I've opted to call these canonical pronouns rather than paleopronouns because it implies historical stuff that's not true. So I'm looking at how neopronouns compare with canonical pronouns in the same grammatical contexts. And then also who's doing what. So when I'm looking at participants' age, gender orientation, like are they cis or trans? And also like how many trans and non-binary people do you know? Do those things affect how people are rating neopronouns? And then also comparing these 4 neopronouns to each other. And one of the questions that we were kind of exploring in this pilot survey is analogy. So some of these pronouns, these neopronouns, look more like existing canonical pronouns, like z could be like a weird misspelling of he or she. And so we're interested in whether ones that are analogous with canonical pronouns are rated higher than ones that are not. So what we did was this large online acceptability judgment survey where we asked people to rate things on a Likert scale from completely unnatural to completely natural. And we had, this is a pilot, so this is going to look like way too many experimental conditions. And you're right. So we had 54 stimuli. 24 of them had neopronouns, where we had 16 target sentences. We have 4 different antecedent types. If you are designing an experiment, don't do this. 4 different antecedent types: feminine, masculine, and neutral names, and then definite NPs. So a definite NP would be like the attorney, and then feminine, masculine, and neutral names we were taking sort of based on vibes. We were not using normed names, but these would be names like Susan versus Jim versus what's one of the neutral names? Alex is one of the plausibly neutral names. And then we matched these with each of the types of neopronouns, all 4 neopronouns. So this is 4 by 4 so far. And then also, oops. Oh, this doesn't appear. Oh, it doesn't appear in the right order. That's sad. Okay, so I'm just missing some labels here. I don't know what happened. The other thing that we had was some ungrammatical controls. So can you see my mouse? Yeah. So we had some ungrammatical controls where the antecedents were anticipated to be ungrammatical. So we had singular inanimate things with neopronouns, like the chair liked that Z, blah, blah, blah. And then we also had plural animates, like the circus clowns, blah, 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 Z. And so our expectation is that neopronouns are 3rd person singular animates. And so using them with an inanimate or using them with a plural antecedent should both be kind of ungrammatical. And then we also included some sort of grammatical sentences. So these are canonical pronouns. We used he, she, and they with all 4 antecedent types, feminine, masculine, neutral names, definite NPs, and then also a bad one, which is the singular inanimate. So this is like the chair, blah, 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 he. And then we have some case errored pronouns that appear with all the antecedent types as well. So we used their in a subject position, and we used him in a subject position. So our idea is that we have some ungrammatical controls and some grammatical controls that are built into this way too complicated experimental design rather than having fillers per se. We also asked for social information, and we also wanted to know a little bit about people's ideological beliefs. So we had 1,000 respondents. We recruited, it was ridiculous. This was when we still had Twitter. We recruited on social media, email lists, and word of mouth, and just asked that people be over 18 and fluent in English. And we asked some demographic questions. We wanted to know gender, age, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, what pronouns the respondents used, and then what languages do you speak. And then for each demographic question, we had a free response and then a select all that apply, like checkboxes, just to make sure that we were not imposing categories in a shitty way. And then we also asked some free response questions, asking, basically trying to elicit some metalinguistic commentary. So we asked if you've heard of neopronouns, do you use neopronouns? Do you have a stance on singular they? And then we also asked if they had advice for future studies, which we get some really interesting comments in that box too. I recommend including that. So here are, walking through these results is going to take a little bit. And so I have some animations that I hope help us. So we have the inanimate controls up here, the plural controls, the singular animate, which is what we expect to be good, and then proper names. And we expect proper names to behave sometimes slightly differently than singular animate antecedents because we're basing this off of singular they research. So just focusing here for a sec on proper name antecedents and then singular animate antecedents, and separating these out into what happened with each of the groups. So the case error controls, this is a relief, are marked as very ungrammatical. It's nice to check that people are willing to say that something is sounds weird. So the case error controls where we're using him or their in a subject position, people really rated those very lowly. And then with proper names with canonical pronouns, he, she, and they were all rated pretty high. Same thing, singular animate like the attorney, blah, 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 he, she, or they, all rated at ceiling. The reason that proper name is a little bit lower than singular animate is that we didn't actually force the pronoun and the proper name to match in gender. So this includes some mismatches. The air quotes are important. And then let's look at the neopronouns. They are not at ceiling and they are not at floor. That's going to be a theme. So the neopronouns are like a really wide distribution and just kind of smushed across the middle of the ratings here. So people are doing a lot of different stuff, and it's not the case that everybody just hates these and finds these ungrammatical. Some people find them fine, clearly, but it's also not the case that everybody finds them fine. So we have to think about, what does that mean for us? Oh, there's my circles that I could have been showing you this whole time. Forgot. The other thing is that the inanimate controls and the plural controls are, again, sort of a reality check of just like, hey, when something is actually ungrammatical, what does that look like? It gives us a useful floor. So a case error and an inanimate is like really bad, which is a relief. And then... No, I thought I had one more circle. This particular column where it's like, oh, well, this is not very bad. It's because inanimate things with they are frequently fine. You can have they with chairs. That's legal. And I want to also point out that the neopronouns are not quite as at floor as you might expect if they were really, really bad. Like, they're pretty close to the floor. They're nowhere near as high as this, but we did get some comments in the survey of like, that's interesting. I didn't know that you could use Z with an inanimate. And I was like, I wasn't trying to tell you that we could, but that's so interesting that you said that. So yeah. So people are doing different stuff. And so now we have to think about social variables. And this is looking at the effective age. Again, my graphs are crazy, so I have animations and I will really use them. So first, focusing on neopronouns with proper names and singular animate antecedents. There seems to be an effective age here where older people on the right are rating these lower and younger people on the right are rating these higher. Note that nobody is rating them at ceiling. So on average, it's not the case that all 18-year-olds are fine with neopronouns. They're high middle with neopronouns. But older people really don't love them. We also, this is important, see a tiny age effect among canonical pronouns, and this is because they is among the canonical pronouns. I was grouping they as a canonical pronoun. It is not a coined neologistic pronoun, but based on a lot of other research on singular they, we know that singular they with a proper name is something that's still undergoing a linguistic change. It's still happening. And so older people are not all the way caught up yet. They're sort of on the tail end of the change. So when I'm grouping all the canonical pronouns together, this is why I'm still getting an apparent like age effect, is because there's some they in there that's like messing it up. And then again, a relief. It is not the case that young people just have really permissive grammars. The case error controls, which are really useful for like, that should be actually ungrammatical. There is no age effect. They are just at the floor for everybody, which is like, again, just a relief of a reality check of like, okay. So now breaking it out by gender, I asked everybody their gender in a free response way. And then I asked, like, when I make a bar graph, which part of the bar graph would you like to be on? And their options were man, woman, others, something other than that, or don't put me on the bar graph. So obviously none of the people who don't want to be on the bar graph are on the bar graph. But like, men and women are not really doing anything different here, which when we're looking at something like sociolinguistic variation or language change, that's actually kind of unusual. The sort of received wisdom is that linguistic changes will be led by women, and that doesn't seem to be quite what's going on here. Men and women both find the case error controls very bad. They find the canonical things mostly good. Again, this variation is in part because we have these mismatches between name and binary pronouns. So we'll get Susan, he, and people are like a little bit across the board on how they feel about that. But their neopronouns are really just around the middle, kind of between a 4 and a 2 here for men and women both. Whereas when I look at people who are like, I'm not a man or a woman, obviously that's not a coherent category, but on average, those people are rating neopronouns higher, and we're getting a median closer to a 5 rather than a 3. They're also rating the canonical pronouns higher, and then we keep watching this green bar because this is the they thing. They're rating they very, very high. It's almost at ceiling here. So that's something to think about. And that's also pretty consistent with previous research on singular they, that men and women pattern closely together, and then everybody who's not one of those is doing something a little different. Oh, there's my thing. Okay. The other thing, we asked people if they were LGBT. The way that we asked this question was a little weird, so I will talk about this in the follow-up. But people who identified as LGBT, whether or not they were in that non-binary category, are behaving similar on the grammatical and ungrammatical controls, which is, again, a relief of like, okay, it's not the case that LGBT people are fine with whatever. They're still rating the case error controls very low. But when we're looking at, no, okay, I thought I had a box. When I'm looking at how they're rating canonical pronouns and neopronouns, in canonical pronouns, they're rating they higher than non-LGBT, I guess, cis-het people. And then they're rating neopronouns a lot higher. And this is also showing that there's a little bit of an age effect within both of these groups. The LGBT group showed a slightly stronger effect of age, which I'm still thinking about what that means. And then the other thing is I did ask people what pronouns they use, and I wanted to know, like, do neopronoun users do something different? And like, you'll be shocked to learn that neopronoun users find neopronouns pretty good. So that's my box here. So neopronoun users find neopronouns pretty good. They users find neopronouns middling, but higher than people who only use one of the canonical pronouns. So this is either he or she. And then we have a bunch of people who did not share their pronouns or checked something else. I don't find the something else category to be a coherent category, but like the fact that the median is high means that there's something going on there. But that's something where we're going to have to look at individual participants and be like, what are you doing in there? Also worth noting that neopronoun users and they users are both rating they very, very highly. Canonical pronoun users are rating it a little less highly. Not low, just a little less. And then the other thing is we asked people, so what did you notice about these sentences? And you'll be shocked to find that they noticed some pronouns. They were like, whoa, there seemed to be some pronouns. So this is just a word cloud of words that they used when they were talking about these sentences, and pronouns was by far the most frequent word. And then they also called out particular pronouns. The most common one that was specifically named was fey. And a lot of them had comments about the pronoun fey because they were saying that they just interpreted it as if it was a name, which I thought was interesting. So we got some responses to these open questions, and a lot of people had some sort of like, well, there are some themes that emerged. So people say it would be easier to accept pronouns that sounded like the ones I would use, like Z for he. Or I voted it higher if it had a phonetic resemblance to a name or a traditional pronoun. Or I naturally subbed it for he or she. Or some linguist who has a really interesting demographic here said that, you know, I was influenced by how phonologically similar the neopronoun was. So people are aware that they're using morphophonological analogy to sort of make neopronouns work in their mind. I think that that's really interesting. And so that's something that we wanted to look up in the follow-up survey. So we changed the stimulus design to have way better experimental design and different ungrammatical and grammatical controls. We had a balanced Latin square design. We used PCIX instead of PCIX instead of Qualtrics. And then we changed which pronouns we were looking at. So the neopronouns we included in this one, just 3 of them, Z, Fey, and Thon. And the idea is that Z is kind of analogous to he or she. Fey is maybe analogous to they, or maybe it's a name. Thon is not really analogous to anything. It's a very old neopronoun, and I think it is made famous by Dinosaur Comics, talks about it a lot. No, nobody gets the reference. So we also changed how we did the demographics questions a little bit and did different binning of how people were reporting stuff. So we wanted to know, is it the case that neopronouns that are more analogous to canonical pronouns are rated higher? And we also were looking at, are item order effects changing? No. Sure hope the slides keep working. Are there item order effects? Because one of the things that people mentioned is in this survey was like, I kind of got used to it over time. So we're like, okay, well, let's look if you're getting used to it over time. So first of all, the relative ratings of neopronouns, he, she, and they with a name are just sort of at ceiling here. We're also doing continuous sliders rather than Likert scales. So that's why the scale goes to 100 now. It makes for much easier math. He, she, and they, again, pretty much at ceiling with a noun phrase. And then in order, Z is better than Fey is better than Thon. And that's true in both the name antecedent and the noun phrase antecedent condition. And there's not a big difference between antecedent type. So this is interesting. And then looking at item order effects, these are in a weird order, sorry. So Fey is first, and it's not really a item order effect. It's kind of flat and kind of low all the way across. He, she, and they don't really have item order effects. And then Thon and Z seem to actually have item order effects, with Thon's slope being the sharpest. The biggest effect could be because it starts the lowest and therefore has the most space to improve over the course of the survey. So this is something that we're still thinking about. Why is this different? And then the effective age, again, of like, how are different people rating this? We'll again see this effective age in they, just with the name condition, but not with the noun phrase condition. And then there is an effective age for all three neopronouns. Sorry, it's so tiny, but ze, fe, and thon all have an age effect, and it is true in both antecedents, where younger people are rating them higher. My x-axis. Oh, it's because it's birth year. Sorry. It's fine. You know what I mean. So younger people are rating these higher, which is still what we saw, and it's a little bit clearer in this follow-up in some ways. I'm going to skip forward a little bit for time. You'll be shocked to know. Oh, yeah. No, I actually do want to mention this. So I tried to ask people if they were queer separately from whether they were cis or trans, but this led me to use, like, do you identify as LGB? And I got yelled at in some emails because they interpreted this as a dog whistle for transphobic beliefs. So I have, the star means don't do this, actually. That's what the star means. But people who are queer, but cis queer people are still rating everything higher than cis straight people. That's really the only interesting thing that I wanted to sort of point out. This is true for all neopronouns, and it is true for they, although they, it is pretty subtle. Okay. And then looking at cis trans people, and then we had this option of sort of neither, which is not a coherent category, and that's why it's kind of in the middle in both. So looking at neopronouns, just at the bottom here for ze, fe, and thon, all across the board, cis people on average are rating the neopronouns lower, trans people are rating them higher. People who marked that they were neither cis or trans are kind of in the middle, I think, again, because this is not a coherent category of people. There are some people who are marking neither because they are transphobic and they don't think cis is a real thing. And then there are some people who are marking it because they have a complicated gender and they don't really, like, there's a lot of reasons why somebody would check neither. So I think that that's why that's that weird middle category. It's not actually a coherent middle category. It's just sort of a catch-all. Neopronoun users also rate neopronouns higher across the board, but thon, this is the only interesting thing about this, is that thon is still not at ceiling. It's the really tiny blue column here where it's still hovering around 80-90% out of 100, whereas the median for fe and ze is pretty much at ceiling for people who use neopronouns as their own pronouns. So the other thing that is super interesting from this part is that we got meta-linguistic commentary from neopronoun users. And so one of the things is that people really talk about autonomy and individual freedom when they're talking about what they wish was going on. So there's no way that a language can have words for the infinite number of ways it means to exist outside of male and female. And my utopia would be a world in which everyone gets to freely choose. I think many trans people in communities are already doing this. My ideal scenario would be gender anarchy. So this is a theme that we're going to keep seeing, is that people who use neopronouns already are people who really want autonomy and individual freedom to be expressive with their linguistic behaviors. So now I'm going to sort of lead into the interviews. This is the new stuff. So this is work in progress, but I want to know, because these have all been acceptability judgments, and it's very, very, very hard to do corpus research on pronouns of any type, but neopronouns, corpus research on neopronouns tends to just bring you a lot of typos or OCR errors. It's really interesting. So I want to know how neopronouns are being used in natural conversation contexts, and I don't think that that's going to happen accidentally, so I have to elicit it somehow. I want to know if people are pausing, self-correcting, or presenting other speech disfluencies when they are speaking English and using neopronouns. I want to know if they are unintentionally misgendering somebody, if they correct themselves, which direction they're misgendering people. I also want to know how people's relationships affect the pronouns that they use. Is it affected by how well you know the person you're talking about? Is it affected by whether you approve of the person's gender identity? I also want to know how neopronoun users conceptualize the relationship between pronouns and identity, and how people's social attitudes about gender and language and transness relate to what they are doing in the conversation. So the methodology is a pain in the butt. This is so slow. So we are doing snowball recruitment, where we are roughly doing something based off my dissertation, but we are recruiting people in pairs, where first I'm recruiting somebody who uses neopronouns, and then I'm asking them to refer to us a study buddy, which is how I've been referring to them, but it's going to continue to be in quotes because I don't know. And the study buddy can be a friend, family, co-worker, just anybody. And we'll do a 2-part study where both the neopronoun user and the study buddy will go through both parts, get asked the same questions, take the same survey. They're going to do a semi-structured interview about language and identity and gender, where we're going to have some really deep and interesting conversations. I've had so much fun with this. And then they're going to do a written survey after they've done their interview with me or my RAs, where they are sharing demographic info and doing some attitude surveys about gender essentialism, trans identities, and linguistic prescriptivism. A little bit on the data so far. So this is all brand spanking new. We so far, as of today, have 5 target speakers, are neopronoun users, and 4 study buddies who have participated so far. Data collection is ongoing. We are working through this huge list of people who signed an interest form, and then we're going to probably do another recruiting push once we work through that. So you will be getting emails from me for just sort of, because these are so low frequency, we just have to reach out to all possible avenues. And then, we're transcribing as we go, and we are not really to the point where we are annotating and analyzing full transcripts of interviews yet, because again, it's slow. But all the target neopronoun user participants have self-ID'd in a free response questions as some combination of non-binary, genderqueer, or agender. These are the only 3 labels that I've gotten from neopronoun users. The study buddies have included, I see that I just have a open, that's so sad. I have the genders that have been reported from study buddies have included cis female, male, non-binary woman. These are, again, self-reported labels that they just get to free response. And one of the things that's interesting, so I'm asking them their pronouns in 2 different ways. First, this is the written survey at the end after we did the interview. They're doing this survey online. So I ask, what pronouns do people use to refer to you? And then I ask, what pronouns should we use to refer to you? And I have found that, boy, it's interesting when the answers to these 2 questions are different. So I'm not showing you all of them, obviously, but I just wanted to show you a couple samples. So these are in order. So number 1 here reports that they prefer, Z prefers, Z here. See, I did it. Shit. Z prefers, Z here, but also gets referred to with pronouns that Z does not prefer. And the sort of unfortunately and occasionally, I think, are very telling. And Z here is the only pronoun that this person reported that Z wants us to use. So you can all email here about that later, that I slipped up, sorry. My second person is somebody who reports mostly they, them, some Z, them. But in terms of what Z wants us to use, Z, them, or they, them, the order has switched, and Z has not given us a frequency instruction, which I think is so interesting. And then 3 is one of my favorite participants. They use they or it or he or surf or dude or loaf. So these are some noun self pronouns, and they tell us about noun self pronouns in this survey question. So any of the above, noun self are conjugated in noun, nouns, noun self ways, i.e. surf, surfs, surf self. And they give us a whole paradigm. I am obsessed with this. They also give us this can be used interchangeably or only one set. So they give us a lot of options, which I'm just like, wow, thank you. This is a lot of detail. So this is a really fun participant. And this is actually the participant who I wanted to just show you some of the commentary. This is a very loose transcription because we are still hand correcting some of these. But this is a 20-year-old white non-binary person from the Pacific Northwest. Who says, it's like I don't really have a lack of, or I have a lack of a gendered feeling, but I also feel very full of like colors and feelings and things that I enjoy and things that I look at and say, oh, I want that for me. So me type things, which is why there's that pin board of just adding things on that I look at. And I'm like, that's pretty gender. That's pretty nice. This is somebody who is like just picking pronouns up off the ground constantly. And so I feel like a funny, silly self connection to something that's like loaves of bread, which is why we get the loaf self set, which I'm just like, oh, yes, love it. So this is a work in progress, obviously. We are not done interviewing. We are not done transcribing. This is the first time I've even told anybody about some of these results. So, like, you're welcome. But my impression so far, first of all, neopronoun users have a lot of different reasons they're reporting on why they are using neopronouns and what they are attempting to do. Study buddies have not actually used any neopronouns, or a lot. I mean, maybe not any in the conversation. But there's some really interesting metalinguistic commentary from everyone and some really interesting pronoun switching, even when it's not pronoun switching between neopronouns. So I hope to be able to share more soon. I have to speed up. I am behind. So neopronouns are not rated as ungrammatical, but they're definitely not rated overall by everybody as totally natural. They're neither floor nor ceiling, and the only exception is people who use neopronouns themselves, but there's not really consistent differences between antecedent types, which is unlike singular they. I think that's interesting. Social demographic variables did correlate with acceptability, and metalinguistic commentary about neopronouns is interesting because neopronouns are super salient, and people have explicit conscious strategies that they're using about doing morphological analogy, and people have strong feelings about the right way to do non-binary language. I am skipping this. Okay, I do want to talk about this. So some speakers do seem to be mostly fine with neopronouns. This is mostly neopronoun users, and it's overall younger, queer, and trans people. I've been asked, is the difference in age an indication of language change? I think it's too early to say yet, and it's really hard to say without any longitudinal work. Because also because metalinguistic comments have suggested that neopronouns have been around and people have been aware of them for a while, but also being aware of a form isn't the same as using the form. So I'm waiting on tenterhooks. I want to know what's going to happen, but I do not feel comfortable saying that this is an ongoing language change the way that we are seeing with non-binary singular they. But also metalinguistic comments tell us what is important to people. So for neopronoun users, what's important is often self-expression, self-determination, creativity, freedom from restrictive categories. But what other people report is sort of important about the neopronouns to them is like, what's the optimal solution? What's the efficient way to deal with this? People also talk about difficulty in remembering and learning pronouns. And then people also say a lot, I would use them if somebody asked me to, but no one has asked me to, which I think is interesting. There's no way to test that. Like, would you? Are you sure? Anyways. Zooming out. I'm racing through because I think I'm way over. Okay. Yes, I want questions too. So this is important because queer language matters. Queer language is a source of freedom, creativity, and playfulness. My loaf self user is my favorite like playfulness mascot right now. But language changes that originate in the queer community, and definite singular they is one of them, carry a lot of heavy indexical baggage, and they get politicized very easily. And in the current political context in the US right now, there's a lot of right-wing state legislatures attempting and sometimes succeeding in making laws about pronouns without really understanding what pronouns are on a linguistic level. And pronouns are being used right now as a symbol of larger socio-political fights and have come to represent transness in a way. The joke of like, of course you have blue hair in pronouns, is fundamentally using pronouns as a shorthand for being trans or queer. So this is a recent case that's still ongoing. The Florida state legislature passed a law banning primary and secondary schools teachers from introducing themselves with their accurate names and pronouns because it's they're claiming that it's making a factual claim about how biological sex works. And so the county school board of Hillsborough, Florida, fired a high school teacher who is just teaching. I think she's a chemistry teacher. Um, and just has pronouns. She just like puts her name and pronouns on the board or whatever. The federal judge in the county case issued an injunction to stop them from firing her. That's currently being appealed by the state of Florida. We're seeing where it's going. But I just wanted to share a little bit of the wording from that injunction from that judge, who says, in sharing her preferred title and pronouns, Ms. Woods celebrates herself and sings herself, not in a disruptive or coercive way, but in a way that subtly vindicates her identity, her dignity, and her humanity. And I think that this is a good sort of demonstration of like what the stakes are when we're talking about pronouns right now. And I think this sort of brings us to what we as linguists need to worry about. So this is about the social responsibility that we as linguists have. We have an ethical responsibility to fight to protect minoritized ways of languaging and to fight against attempts to use language to perpetuate structural harms. And translate ways of languaging are under constant attack because they're a proxy for trans people and for trans liberation. And I can't read this John Henner quote without crying, so I'm just going to leave it on the screen for a sec and go on. So there's more work to be done. I'm so excited to be doing these interviews. I'm having so much fun. I'm also having a lot of fun with the study buddies because sometimes you get to talk to like an 80-year-old cis dude about his gender identity, and he has one. It's so cool. Anyways, I am exploring the relationship between gender essentialist and trans affirming and prescriptivist language attitudes. This is a complicated relationship with a lot of different strands that we need to keep picking apart. We desperately need more work on trans and non-binary languaging in languages other than English and the big ones. I want to support or collaborate with anybody who is working on this. So like do cold email me and I'll be like, hell yeah. And I just want to end on the note that taking trans and queer language seriously is something that makes it better and safer for trans and queer linguists and outside the academy. And that's really important. I want there to be more of us. Thank you.
This is your warning for your eyes. Turn on the light.
Oh, thank you.
It got really dark during there, so.
Fully building it. I'm so sorry, guys.
Thank you so much for that wonderful talk. I'm sure that there are maybe from the audience. Yeah, there we go. Are we good with the light? All right, we do have a few minutes for questions before we attack the snaps. So, who would like to ask Dr. Conrad questions about anything? I can pass it.
Hands? Go ahead. Oh. Okay. Do I have to do anything? Should be on. Okay. I had a question about your last point about taking language seriously, and kind of the fact that a lot of people don't. So like the internet's a terrible place sometimes, and I've seen a lot of people that mock, especially the noun self pronouns. And I guess I'm not a linguist and like not a linguistics student, but I'm curious about what that kind of behavior, what role it plays linguistically and like how it impacts, I don't know, what you study and all that kind of stuff.
Thank you. I think that's a really important question. And I think that this thing is just not going to let me take notes, which is so sad. So I might just, well, it's not going to let me full screen either, is it? No. Well, we'll just look at that. So in terms of the particular mocking of noun self pronouns as a stand-in for especially queer identities, I think really plays on the fact that these are very, very, very minoritized, that they are seen as like, a good way of thinking about it is like, oh, it's whimsical, and a bad way of thinking about it, it's like, ridiculous. And so I think that the things that people can do to counteract that are to just refuse to participate, and to, use people's pronouns, but push back when people are like, haha, isn't it funny that Bun uses Bun self pronouns? To say, I don't understand why it's funny. Why would that be funny? And like, what is your problem with people having Like, how does this affect you in any way? Just don't talk about bun. My response to bad faith interlocutors who are really, really committed to misgendering people is like, don't talk about them then, because that's something that they refuse to do, and it will make them look worse and worse, and they'll have a little tantrum on their blog, and then you can just block them. But you're right that the internet is bad, and I don't have a solution for that. If you think of anything, I want to know about it. Yeah, thank you.
You can use this for notes if it works. So go 1, 2, 3.
Hi. So I know most of my interaction, like having met people with, especially noun self pronouns, but neopronouns as a whole, was mostly over like 2020 Discord. Um, and then a lot of the people that I knew that used them eventually left them behind, whether it was for reasons of them feeling like it didn't suit them anymore or just people not using them. Do you think that is something that happened across the board as a result of COVID, or was that just something possibly that happened because we were middle schoolers?
I love the important note that you were middle schoolers, because I was not a middle schooler during 2020. So I'm like, oh, right. I was on Discord, but I was not in middle school. Right. So um, I think that your answer of like it didn't suit anymore or people weren't using them really is telling. And so if people are refusing to use the pronouns that you're asking for, you will eventually stop asking, or you're going to have a nervous breakdown and block everybody that you know. And those are the two reactions that I've seen. And so I think that there is probably a lot of people who want to be using neopronouns or fun, funky little loaf self pronouns, but they aren't doing it because they are afraid that it just won't be taken up by the people around them. And I think that that's sort of transphobia winning, unfortunately. But the other thing is that people eventually sort of dropping it because it's like, this doesn't feel like me anymore. It feels like a natural, like, good thing about making it safe to experiment and try out identities. I think that's especially important for young people, but I think that it's really important to continue making it safe for people to experiment with their identity for the entirety of their lives. I want my 80-year-old cis male participant to try on a funky little gender once in a while and see if they like it. And so I think that being being ready to play ball when somebody is trying something out is one of the most supportive things you can do. And if somebody's giving them shit, just like frowny face. In terms of if it's COVID, I know a lot of people like discovered some stuff about themselves during the initial lockdowns. And I think that just like, okay, we're all moving online and that's going to affect our behavior is like, well, yes, true. Yeah.
Hi, I know you talked about, like you said that, um, like the word pronoun is kind of being used as a synecdoche to kind of talk about like attack trans people like indirectly. Um, do you think that like, why do you think like the politicization of pronouns is like a thing? Just because, I mean, like, um, because like I mean every language has them. Like, do you think people are just they're just full of hate or like or what?
Thank you for reminding me of the word synecdoche. Um, wrote it down. So in terms of why anti-trans actors have latched onto the concept and word pronouns in particular, I think it's very, very specific to English speaking contexts. It's true that arguably every language has pronouns, but a majority of the world's languages do not mark gender on their pronouns. English is just one of those typologically like kind of weird languages that does. A lot of languages mark other social information on pronouns like formality or closeness or whether or not you're related to somebody. And the reason that in the English speaking context that they've really latched onto this is in part because they are reacting to demands for autonomy by trans people. So I think that this is fundamentally a reactive ideology where trans people were like, I would like you to use pronouns for me. And people who already didn't want to give trans people autonomy or any sense of self determination were like, I don't know what that word means that you just said, but I do know that you cannot be asking me for things. And so if you're asking me for something, I will deny it to you. And I think that fundamentally they would have latched onto anything. It's just an accident that pronouns happened to be the thing that they latched onto. And it's certainly not the only thing that they are using to talk about sort of denial of trans people's right to self-determination, right? There's lots of discussion about letting children play sports or go in bathrooms, and so this is part of a larger conversation, and it just happens to be that this is one of the few demands that they feel imposed upon by, I think.
Oh, don't look into the light.
Hi. So obviously a lot of neopronouns are founded in like the unique gender experience of the person that's using them. Like the loaf guy. Loaf feels that something can be meaningfully expressed about Loaf's experience of gender by comparing it to a loaf of bread. But for the ones that don't evoke anything in particular, like either Z or Thon, what makes you, like in your opinion, what makes someone choose one over the other?
Longer steps.
That's such a good question. I also want to know this. I don't know. I am going to keep asking, and I'll tell you if I figure anything out. I get the sense that in addition to like, loaf person likes the concept of loafs. It's just like I love this. Dude also uses dude self pronouns, and I'm just like yes. But one of my participants who uses Z with an X likes the look of the orthographic X and feels that like there's something about the indexicality of the X that's like an alien cyber or something. And so I also know that that's sort of true for fair of like being an ethereal fairy like being. So there are some expressive things that are linked to the like not noun self neopronouns that are like a little bit more abstract. And then I think that there are also some like historical roots. So my understanding of Z here is that it has more uptake. Like it's Z here is Leslie Feinberg's pronouns, and so I think like sometimes like people will take on particular neopronouns of like this is an homage to someone who has a really cool gender that I admire, and so I think that there are a lot of different reasons, and I don't have a clear and a coherent pattern or generalization overall. I'm we'll see if stuff emerges, but it's such a good question, so thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. Your research sounds so fascinating. I'm curious, you said that more scholarship is needed in non-English languages and non-major languages. I'm curious then, in languages like Spanish or German or Danish that have been experiencing a similar cultural shift and acceptedness to the trans experience, what does this acceptedness look like in those languages that don't have an epicene they or like a canonical pronoun without gender? Thank you so much.
I'm not allowed to talk about a thing until a contract is signed, but maybe. So languages have a few different strategies, and it sort of depends on what they have lying around already. But in terms of Spanish in particular, I can answer that they are doing some interesting stuff with a bunch of their morphosyntax because they have these inflectional gendered endings. And so they're like, well, we can't just do pronouns. We also have to do a bunch of other stuff. And then there's also a few neopronouns in Spanish. And in German, there's also a couple neopronouns. One of my participants, Z Zem user, is bilingual in German and English and is living in a German speaking context right now. And so Z talked a lot about how people are referring to them in German versus in English, and how Z is like defaulting to English sometimes because it's just easier, which is the thing that I get reported anecdotally a lot. But there's also anecdotally, I have heard people just using the English they while using other languages as just like basically a loan word, which is so fascinating. And then there's also like a few languages that sort of have homegrown neopronouns. So French has yel, and yeah, other stuff. And then Spanish, French, and German are also like really big colonial languages. And so I know so much less about what's going on in not big colonial languages. And so this is something that like we need to keep looking. And in terms of when I ask this question, it depends on who I ask. And when I ask a cis person, they're like, oh, well, maybe they could do this, this, and this. And they go for that sort of like, what's the most efficient and optimal strategy? And when I ask trans and non-binary people, they're like, oh, well, you know, this is some stuff I'm trying, but there's not a lot of uptake. And so I'm really interested in finding like more non-binary and trans communities, because it's a known phenomenon that like a lot of trans and non-binary people have trans and non-binary friends. And so you'll get like very densely packed little sort of social networks where there will be a kind of a familect within this like 6-person group chat. And I want to know what they're doing. So ask your friends. I don't know. Email me. Please, let's get on it. But yes, thank you.
Look at your nice long applause. Oh my God, so fabulous. Thank you so much. And thank you all for your questions. It's not over. We're just opening up the refreshments. So we do hope that you will, with your permission, come up and talk to Dr. Conrad more. I saw more hands. We didn't get to all the questions. So, grab something to eat, come say hi, mingle. And thank you again to all the co-sponsoring units on campus. Thank you so much to our department and to CAS for your support. And I wanted to give a little shout out also to the Georgetown Linguistics cohort, because we have a little group here. So we are a cross university crowd tonight, which is kind of fun. So reunion. No. So enjoy, please. Thank you.